Duality gives meaning to events. When there is a belief in being a thing that is separate from other things, there exists the perception of the potential for ownership. There can be gains and losses and the feelings associated with them. Most people play poker differently with fake money than real, and so it is with living. The drives to mitigate loss and make gains are greater in unconscious body identification than when awareness is not believed to be anything appearing in itself, though risks can be equally well mitigated and gains equally well pursued. In the absence of body identification, the emotional cost of rumination and ignorance can be forgone, allowing for greater energetic resources to be brought to the effort of gaining and mitigating. With an absence of desire, things aren't pined for and yet are still enjoyed, and bad things aren't dreaded but still bring discomfort, inconvenience, and complication, though the extra pain of mental anguish is muted. Ramana Maharshi said that unhappiness is just unwanted thoughts, but the state he was in was not merely a function of thought curation, but rather something in belief that altered how they were reacted to. What gives thought power over most people didn't exist in him, and that was the automatic belief in being the corruptible subject of any idea. Thinking cannot be perpetually controlled. There will eventually be thoughts. When someone asked Ramana how to treat others, he replied, "There are no others." And it wasn't a solipsistic view. He just didn't see others in what can be perceived, only the self in what perceives it. Establishment-controlled institutions cultivate obsession with identity because once embedded in the conceptual self, that information becomes something that can be predictably relied upon to yield a specific reaction in the face of an event that they can project into your consciousness at will through the mediums that they control. It's a big world with a lot of things going on at any given moment. There's an example of almost any scenario you can imagine going on at all times. Unlimited potential anecdotes that can be highlighted or not highlighted. This means that the stream of information coming at the public can be focused on the anecdote of choice to yield the desired reaction at a time of the projector's liking. The controllers of content can also ignore and suppress information that may otherwise counter their example or lend some perspective on the bigger picture and thus the truth. It's a suppression of the full truth. This is the effect of consolidation in the traditional media, combined with the use of technology to censor social media outlets that are already highly consolidated. Concurrent to this, governments in the so-called free world are locking people up for voicing dissent. The interests that control the media outlets are themselves in a symbiotic relationship with the politicians who want to undermine the right to free speech. These moneyed interests support their proxies' political campaigns in a system that allows for unlimited dark money, and thus the conversion of private money to public power for private interests. While the motive for supporting this arrangement is the procurement and maintenance of worldly power and wealth for its patrons, the consequences for the public are both material and spiritual. The cultivation of identity in the individual creates a state of being that precludes awakening. In awakening is the death of unconscious identification with thought and form. While there is still knowledge of the identifiers that inform the world of our place in it, there's no unconscious sense of being that form, energy, or idea that appears in the awareness we are. This affects the reaction to information. A person who is not unconsciously identified with an institutionally cultivated identity cannot be manipulated. But beyond this, the inner stillness this non-reacting affords allows for a contentment that destroys the hunger that subjects one to perverse economic incentives. Despite the manipulative intentions of the powerful, a cultivated state of identification can cause suffering that gives impetus to seek relief. The quest for relief can be pursued down different paths. One would be to bend the world to serve the interests of the thing with which there is identification. And this is the objective of those who project this information, the selected information, to get a result. This is the path of the activist, to change the world according to some elite-sponsored narrative. There can be temporary relief in worldly victories for the view with which there is identification, but it yields no insight into the cause and end of suffering. But if the desired state of affairs for the worldview cannot be arrived at, there can be an even greater frustration that motivates the search for an inner solution that decouples state from circumstance. In this is the exposing of the manipulator's modus operandi and the individual's recipe for neutralizing their means of control. This ultimate frustration of worldly objectives and its consequence was alluded to by Carlos Castaneda in his books regarding the Yaqui Indians and their proliferation of shamanism in the face of an unavoidable destruction of their traditional way of life.